Welcome into our new video lecture series here with the one and only, the 14th World Chess Champion, Viswanathan Anand. Vishy, we are so excited to have you take us through your games and some of the biggest moments in your career here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be presenting some of my fondest memories, let's say, and most memorable games. And I hope the audience will get a glimpse of not only what it was like to play these games, but what it felt before, after, and during.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm the luckiest chess kid in the world. Obviously, someone who grew up idolizing and watching your games. My first actual chess tournament I followed that mattered, by the way, was the 1995 World Championship match between Viswanathan Anand and Garry Kasparov. Do you remember that match? Were you there for that?
Yeah, I made it. I made it somehow for that one.
Yeah, you made it.
And there is this nice picture of Kasparov and me staged on the 108th floor. So we played on the 107th floor, but for that photo, we went up one notch, and there's the New York skyline, literally, everywhere around us. And turned out Hikaru was there for one of those days as well. So,
oh, I didn't know that, but it makes sense.
As a seven-year-old.
Yeah,
so
it makes sense because he's only a couple years younger than me. So I learned to play chess in the summer of 1995. And inspired a little bit earlier that by the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer. And so it really was, I was like, oh, I'm into chess. And oh, there's a world championship match going on in New York. And so I would turn 10 later that year. And so, yeah, it makes sense. Hikaru was already playing chess before me and would come visit. Vishy, we're going to do so much in this series. The series is titled How You Became the Five-Time World Chess Champion. We're going to be going through a number of games just to set the tone here for you viewers. I think probably about 10 videos in total within the series, but we'll let that shape out. And we picked this game to start because we thought it was actually maybe your first game against a former world chess champion, but it wasn't. You were 19 in this game, the Black Pieces versus TAL, in a tournament, youth versus experience, right? Tell everybody a little bit about what this tournament was and whether this was your first game against a former world champion or not.
Okay, so this was in 1989 in February, and I had just played in the tournament in Vaikensee. At that time, it was called the Hohovens tournament. Now it's Tata Steel. And I got this lovely invitation from Basil Koch to play this tournament in Cannes. And as everything that Basil Koch did, he put us up in a fantastic hotel. And as a junior, that's quite something. As a junior, you don't expect to stay in the Martinez right on the beachfront in Cannes, right next to the where the film festival happens and all that.
A little better than sharing a hotel room with Ben Feingold, right? That's a little better than sharing a room with Ben Feingold, right?
Absolutely. No, even that was very nice also. And there, TAL was my co-commentator. Michael TAL was my co-commentator. Or I should say I was supposed to help him entertain the audience. Let's put it that way. But this was about 8 months after that. I had this very, very nice invitation. And it was a good sign that the youngsters were quite dangerous. So I remember Ulf Andersson won the tournament, half a point ahead of me. But after that, some of his elders were struggling a bit. Bent Larsen struggled a bit, Spassky, TAL as well. And it was only Miles and Ulf Andersson, who are roughly from the 50s, who managed a bit easier. And so it was a very nice event. I checked once you mentioned this fact to me, and the previous day I had beaten Boris Spassky in the third round, and this was the fourth round. Having said that, I did not remember that myself till I had to go and look it up. But theoretically, Spassky was my first World Chess Champion that I played in a classical game. I had played Karpov in a blitz, but Spassky was the first champion I played in classical chess, and this was the next day.
Okay. Well, obviously getting a win against a world champion in the previous day is also pretty good, but I think there's a reason we picked this game. For any of you who haven't seen it, starting off this series with Vishy's win with the Black Pieces against TAL is going to be a great experience for you. You're in for a treat. And so I'm going to dive in. There's so much we're going to get into this series. That's what makes this so much fun, going over the great games, learning the chess moments, but having the discussion. But you faced in English, and where were you at this stage in terms of your opening repertoire? Were you, playing in the international stage against a guy like TAL? Were you already you would go on to be one of those guys who was known for winning games at home. And we'll get into that later on in this series, some of your most notable victories coming just from incredible preparation. But where were you at this stage, facing the black pieces and facing in English?
My opening preparation at this stage in my career, I'd become a grandmaster just a year earlier. And my opening preparation at this stage was quite similar to someone on the US or English open circuit. It was improvised. It was meant to win with both colors. No solid openings and all that yet, though they had started to creep in. And they were definitely not deeply researched. Literally, my opening preparation consisted of going through games in Chess Informant, and whichever bits I found interesting, I remembered, and I would play them. I would check them very briefly. If nothing obvious turned up, that was my repertoire. And so one day I could play c5 against the English. The next day I could play e5. A third day I could play b6. Right. It's hard to convey just how limited opening preparation was in the pre-computer era compared to today. Clearly, it grew slowly, but by the year 2000 or so, it was very hard to compare opening preparation from a previous generation with modern stuff. The analysis held up for a long time. I think in the last 10 years, you can rewrite most opening theory that comes from these notebooks and so on. But initially, at least, a lot of our conclusions held up for quite some time.
I was going to say you're kind of answering the question I had prepared then, not just what you were doing in your approach to the first stage of things. Like you said, playing for win with both sides, it would make sense as to why you chose this aggressive knight d4 line. I guess you were improvising and playing sharp lines as best you could. I'm going to go through it and get to this first main position where you played the move rook to b8, and you're already playing an aggressive idea here, trying to attack on the queen side, expose the pressure on the long diagonal. But we're just in a position like this, were you already on your own improvising, or was this still any kind of prep?
I mean, it was prep where I knew that rook b8 existed. And the point of rook b8 is simply to allow me to play bishop d7, c6. There's an additional threat of b5. And if cb5, then I go bishop b7. Yeah,
I'll
bishop
make some
g2, for instance.
Just to show something. If b5 comes, the knight is pinned to the bishop, and if cb5, bishop b7.
Bishop b7, and then white has to play e4, and you could make a case that there is some compensation there, but But the second idea is also just to develop the bishop to c6, which is what happened in the game. And literally, as was the state of my opening preparation in those days, I saw rook b8 in a book. I thought, okay, I can play that, and I went to the board. I love that. It's incredibly naive. It's incredibly naive looking back, but that's how it was in those days. And actually, sometimes I miss that.
Well, I mean, I don't know, incredibly naive. I think it was probably, for the times, especially when you weren't nearly as afraid as a top player that doing something like that would not just be punished, but be punished in a way where you would never have a chance again, right? And obviously, I've never played chess at your level, but I imagine nowadays, part of the reason you would say it's naive to think that is because if you were to do that at any level now, even lower than the world's elite, there's a very good chance that improvising meets something that is just someone worked it out at home and you're dead, right? Is that fair to say?
Partially, that's true to say. It's also true that chess has become more concrete. You could just play moves that seem natural and so on. Of course, you had to do some calculation, but your calculation didn't extend that far. We used a lot of intuition. Now, there are so many more ideas you have, ingredients to work with. And at least I find that you have to navigate them. You can still play improvisational chess, and you can still do things at the board at a minute's notice. But it helps if you know what you have to avoid. Right. So yeah, that's where it comes from. Anyway, I played knight h6 because that's what I had seen once, and it seemed relevant to bring the knight to f5. But later on, I thought about this, and I felt that even after getting to f5, it's not clear what my knight is doing there. Right. And there's one particular line in the game which will highlight this. So a couple of years later, when I played Karpov, I think literally 2 years from this date, I played Karpov in Linares, and then I deviated to knight f6, which I found to be stronger. Okay. Or my knight seemed more natural then. Okay.
Well, that's interesting, and we'll get into that line like you said after queen to d1, castles, and then you go for the idea you highlighted, not the same while the queen is on f3 to bring the bishop to this diagonal, but still the right plan here for black, right? Bishop d7.
Also, there is a b5 option
Okay.
after bishop d7. Sorry, after bishop d7,
Okay. So bishop
where I'm
d7,
threatening b5
threatening
and
b5. So white
cb5. I
plays
can take with the
a4.
bishop because of the pin. Yeah.
White plays a4 to slow that down. You play bishop to c6, and now things start to get more wild with d4. I'm going to kind of go through the line here and maybe stop me when you feel like we're reaching something instructional or something worthy of note. But takes and rook c8 is interesting in that you've kind of had to abandon this whole b5 idea. But how are you feeling about your chances at this point?
Looking at it today, it seems to me that suddenly the knight on h6 is kind of misplaced. f5 is not the ideal square. I'd prefer it on f6. In fact, I'm not even sure the queen d3 was the right way to go. I think if he had played d5, we'll see this. If he had played d5, then my knight is looking awkward. If I even after it goes to f5, where is it supposed to go on further? White can make moves like rook a2 and move his knight in exchange and kind of improve. But what is black supposed to do? If I play e6 at some point, then these pawns could be a bit soft. But otherwise, the knight has no natural way back. So I think nowadays I'd probably take on d4 instead of rook c8.